Hi, my name is Leah Day, and welcome to Quilt Along number 10 on the Free Motion Quilting Project. This week we're going to start working on a very small whole cloth quilt. Now, whole cloth quilting is going to allow us to learn many things about quilting that a regular bed-size quilt or some big project really wouldn't teach us. And hopefully we'll be able to quilt this together over the next 3 weeks and learn many techniques along the way. The first technique that we really need to cover in order to make this quilt is quilt marking. You need to be able to easily transfer all of these motifs, the larger flowers and the feather designs, onto your fabric. You don't need to transfer the very tight stippling. That's filler quilting, and we'll cover that later on. But what you mostly need to be able to do is transfer these big motif shapes onto your fabric so you can follow them and stitch right on a line when you're making your whole cloth. There's of course millions of ways of marking your quilt. I have my favorites and a couple new techniques that I've been playing with as well. So let's learn how to prepare and mark our fabric in preparation for whole cloth quilting. The first step to preparing your whole cloth quilt top is to pre-wash the fabric, then starch and iron it. It's really good and important to get all of the wrinkles out of your fabric before marking. And just so you know, I use Niagara brand spray starch for this. I really like this starch. And I starch from the right side first. So I've sprayed down the right side of the fabric, and now I'm pressing from the wrong side, and this is getting a very good bond between the starch and the fabric. A lot of people complain about starch flaking off, creating kind of these white crystals that flake off their quilt, and a lot of that is because you've sprayed the starch on the fabric but it's stayed on the surface, and then your iron hits it and it immediately crystallizes. So you want that starch to actually get into the fabric and bond and not be flaking off the surface. Once I starch and iron one side, I'm going to starch that same wrong side that I've just pressed, flip it over again, and this time press from the right side. And I do this because I really want starch on both sides of the fabric. It's going to give the stiffest result, and it's going to bond with both sides of the fabric. So it really is the best way to prepare a whole cloth. And the main reason that we want the fabric to be this stiff is that we cannot iron the fabric after it's marked. Most marking pens will heat set if you ironed the quilt top after it's marked, and so that would be really, really bad. You want to get everything nice and stiff and starched now rather than later. And this is just a very good way to prep. So here's what it will look like before you start marking, no matter which marking method you use. My favorite way to mark fabric is using a light box. And this is a large box with a light on it and a translucent surface that allows you to shine the light through the pattern, through your fabric, and see where to mark all of those lines on the fabric surface. And so here I'm just taping the pattern to the tabletop and then taping my fabric in place. And you want to just secure it, make sure that the fabric's not going to shift. With any of these methods, you're going to want to tape and secure the pattern first, or the fabric first, depending on what is on the bottom, what's on top, and make sure that all the layers are secured together before you start marking. Otherwise things can shift and then your pattern would be distorted, and that's not what you want. For this lighter fabric, I'm using a fine line water-soluble blue pen. And water-soluble means that whenever the quilt is done, I will need to soak the quilt in water, and then all of the marks will come out. And notice that I am marking from the center. I always start in the center and work my way to the outside edges. This way, if any shifting happens, it's going to slowly spread to the outside and hopefully be balanced in the quilt. Of course, not everyone is going to have a light box, and while I think that they're a very necessary and essential tool to quilting, not everyone has them. So here's a cool alternative. You can hang your pattern on a glass door, make sure to tape it and secure it, and then tape your fabric on top. And that way you'll be able to mark through and see the lines as you mark. Of course, this is not perfect, and not everyone's going to have access to a door that's big enough. So let's investigate some other techniques that work for marking as well. One of the simplest ways to deal with this whole marking issue is to pick a fabric that is light enough that you can see the pattern through it without the aid of a light box or any other material. And so here you can see this light yellow fabric, can easily see the pattern through it, and so it's going to be a very simple process to mark it. Don't feel pressure to mark the entire pattern. If you aren't ready to tackle the feathers in this pattern, simply eliminate them and mark only the center motif and the corner flowers, and that will be more than enough to play with this project. Another method of marking is to use tissue paper. This is a very popular method to mark a piece of very thin tissue paper with their pattern. Lay your fabric out and then layer the tissue paper on top. You're going to want to hand baste this in place so that way it doesn't shift as you're quilting, and you will use this in the quilting process. Of course, once you quilt it, you will actually have to rip all that tissue paper off, and that can be a time-consuming process. So with tissue paper marking, it's kind of a balance between time-consuming ripping paper off, but also the benefit of not having to use a light box or having to transfer the marks to your actual fabric. You know, once the tissue paper is ripped off, there will be no marks left over. So if you're worried about marks being left on your fabric, this would be a good method for you. Yet another method for marking your quilt is to use tracing paper. And this uses kind of a different layering. We're going to put the fabric on the bottom, the tracing paper in the middle, and you want to make sure that that is the waxy side down, so it's actually going to mark your fabric, and then the pattern on top. And then you'll use a tracing wheel to trace along the lines of the pattern. Of course, this is a little challenging because you're going to have to move that tracing paper at some point in the process, and you're going to have to line everything back up again. This is not my preferred method for marking simply because it's very challenging, and I always have very bad luck with it. I always end up putting the tracing paper on the wrong side. So that's just my personal opinion, though. I would definitely encourage you to try these different techniques, see what works best for you, and experiment as you work on your whole cloth. Finally, it's time to get this whole cloth quilt basted up in preparation for quilting. And here is my favorite basting method. I use 1-inch elastic strips to pull the backing of the quilt very tight against the table surface. And you can see I stuck my fingers on the fabric. It's not super tight, but at the same time it is tight enough that there are no wrinkles, and it is a very nice bond to the table surface. Now I'm going to spread out my batting, and what I'm doing here, I'm being really meticulous and going through that batting and going through the fabric and making sure there's no little strings or pieces of lint or anything that's going to show up, because this is very light fabric. This is that yellow fabric again, and any string, any lint, anything in there is going to show through. So you want to make sure to run over your fabric, both the backing, the batting, and the quilt top with a lint roller to make sure that there's no guys kind of hiding in that middle layer that you don't want in there. Of course, there are going to always be some edges of your quilt that you're going to have to secure with masking tape, but I do find that the elastic strip method really does work to get that backing fabric nice and firmly attached to the table surface, so there's no shifting going on. To baste, my preferred method now is using pen mores. What I do is just simply insert the pen into the quilt sandwich, the top, batting, and backing, and then stick on a pen more. And here I've zoomed in so that way you can see what I'm doing. I just simply insert the pen through all 3 layers and then cap it with a pen more. And this holds very securely. I'll tug on it a bit just to make sure it's got a nice firm hold. And I really like this method because it's very easy to attach and it's very easy to take off. Whenever I'm quilting, I don't want to have to stop and fiddle with safety pins, and this is much, much easier. You want to baste pretty closely whenever you are working on your whole cloth, simply because things can shift and get out of control very easily, especially when you start filling on a small scale. So I baste, as you can see, about every 2 inches when working on a whole cloth. Most of these pens will be able to be removed when we do stitching on a line next week. So don't worry about having tons of pens in your way. They won't be in your way for very long. Once the layers of the quilt are secured, all of the pens will be taken out. And here's what your whole cloth should look like. Just simply remove the pins holding the elastic straps in place. And the nice thing about using the elastic is you can reuse it. Unlike masking tape, which really doesn't last past one use, you can use the elastic strips over and over again and you don't throw them away. So it's reusing a material that we probably already have in our sewing room. And then just simply remove the masking tape if you used any on the sides or corners. And this is what your quilt will look like when it's ready to go and be quilted next week. So that's it for this week. I really hope you'll give some of these marking methods a try and you'll get your little heart and feather whole cloth ready to go and basted out in preparation for next week. We're going to have a lot of fun making this quilt, but it won't be any fun if I'm the only one doing it. Even if you don't think you're going to be very good at stippling on such a tiny scale or stitching on a line, don't worry about it. The first time that you make a whole cloth, it's not going to be perfect, but it will teach you loads of new techniques and challenge you to kind of get out of your own creative box. So I think it's going to be a really fun project for us all to work on. And don't worry, we won't be working on this forever. We will go back to working on bed quilts, throws, all that normal kind of stuff. Pretty much anything goes here on the Free Motion Quilt Along. Also, don't forget to link up any progress you've had with Free Motion Quilting. We've been away for a little while, so make sure to link up your progress because I can't wait to see what you've been working on in your sewing room. Until next time, let's go quilt. Find pen moors, the pen anchors used to baste our whole cloth quilt, along with fine line water-soluble marking pens in the Day Style Designs quilt shop. That's daystyledesigns.com.